Sorry, wrong video. All right, here we go. So, hey, today we're going to take a look at complex sentences, and particularly we're going to look at what we call the nominal clause. I find this to be one of the more challenging structures that we have to create in Unit 3. So a complex sentence is made up of what we call a dependent clause and an independent clause. And an independent clause is just a fancy way of saying, hey, it's a simple sentence. And what happens is we take this simple sentence and we add in another clause, which kind of makes it now more complex because that clause that we've added is what we call a dependent clause. Now, a clause by definition, you can see that I'm using this word clause a lot, but a dependent clause by definition, any kind of clause is a subject and a verb. So as soon as I have a subject and a verb, I've created what we call a clause. And we have independent clauses, which is like a simple sentence, and we have dependent clauses. And a dependent clause is dependent upon something else in order for it to make sense. By itself, it won't make any sense at all. It sounds like a fragment. But once I kind of group it with the rest of the sentence, it'll actually make sense. So we have a number of like 4 different dependent clauses we have in English language. This is our very first introduction into using clauses. So a nominal clause, or what some people might refer to as a noun clause, is a clause which is a subject and a verb that it actually begins with what we call either an expletive, which we've had expletives before, like to be and as, but that's not one of the ones we're going to use this time. So we're going to kind of expand our knowledge of expletives. Or it might begin with an interrogative, which is a fancy way of saying, hey, a question word. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to serve as one of the 6 nominal positions or one of the 6 noun positions in the sentence. So in plain words, it's going to be a sort of a little mini sentence, which is sort of doing the job of a single noun. Like it's a mini sentence being the subject, or it's a mini sentence being the direct object. Let me show you an example. It says, whoever ate the last brown sugar and cinnamon Pop-Tart owes me an apology. Well, my verb is actually sitting way out here, owes. When I said, well, who owes you an apology? It's not one single person's name. It's this entire structure. Whoever ate the last brown sugar and cinnamon Pop-Tart. This whole thing is trying to be the subject. But I'm like, well, that's a really complex subject. Like, I know it's complex because if you think about it, this subject has both a subject and a verb. It's like a little mini sentence that's serving as the subject. So therefore, it's a clause doing a noun job. So we call it a noun clause or a nominal clause. Another example, it says, Mr. Sterner told me how he secretly buys and resells vintage Barbie dolls on eBay. Well, Mr. Sterner's our subject, told is our action verb. This is my indirect object. He's telling to me. And what's he telling you? He's telling you this whole thing. This whole thing is your direct object. And you think about it, it's not just simply one single noun as a direct object. Mind-blowing, it is an entire sentence as a direct object. Here's the word he as a subject, and then here's my verb, buys and resells. So it's like a little mini sentence or a clause that's actually doing the job of a single noun, which is the direct object. And once again, if you think about, if I only read the part that's underlined, it wouldn't make sense to say whoever ate the last brown sugar and cinnamon Pop-Tart. That's why we call it dependent, because it's depending on the rest of the sentence in order for it to make sense. Or it wouldn't make sense to say how he secretly buys and resells vintage Barbie dolls on eBay. By itself, it won't make sense. It's dependent, or it's kind of leaning on the rest of the sentence in order for it to function. So when we talk about a noun clause is only going to begin one or 2 ways. And we're going to start off with the easier of the 2, which is what the expletive. So let's go on down to the very bottom of this worksheet. I'm going to change my screens on you here. So the very bottom of this worksheet, we're going to take a look at the first type of noun clause we have, which starts with what we call the expletive that. So now we're going to add a third expletive to our list of as and to be. And the word that can be an expletive. So once again, an expletive is a word that it has no grammatical role in the sentence at all. It's sort of extra. And oftentimes we can actually cut it out of the sentence because you don't really need it. This is going to be a little different from what we call the relative pronoun that, which we're going to get to a little later. So there's various uses of the word that in English language. It can be a little confusing. Let me show you some examples, and then we're going to diagram them so we can visually see how this works. So if I said your ridiculous assumption is that I find your 12-pack abs to be impressive. Well, this noun clause, and how do I know it's a noun clause? It starts off with the word that, has a subject I, has a verb find. So here's my subject and here's my verb. So it's a clause, starts off with the word that, and on top of it, all of that, it actually serves as the predicate nominative. Basically what you're saying is your assumption is that I find your 12-pack abs to be impressive. On down here it says that you bought your college degree on the dark web does not surprise me. Well, this is once again a nominal clause. Starts off with the word that, there's our expletive that, has a subject you, has a verb bought, but collectively this whole thing is actually trying to be the subject of the sentence. Because when I say, well, what does not surprise me? This whole thing. So we got to see that this whole structure is trying to work as the subject. So when we diagram them, you're going to visually see that a little easier. So let's use the bottom of this worksheet to diagram these two sentences. So see if you can make room for two diagrams down here. Let me change my screen and take on this first one. So your ridiculous assumption is, so I'm going to start off, this is my subject of my sentence, this is my verb, and this is my predicate nominative. This is a very basic pattern 3 sentence. So I'm going to build this close to the bottom because I'm going to need some space above. I'm going to need a little space below, but most of it's going to be above. So my subject is assumption. My verb is. I'm going to add in my words describing it. So here's my determiner. It's your assumption. Here's my adjective. It's a ridiculous assumption. And then because it's to be verb, it's looking for either an adjective, it's looking for a noun to rename it. And then I have this entire structure. Oh, I'm going to highlight it for you. All right, so you can see this entire structure is trying to be the predicate nominative. That highlighting was really bad. And so this whole thing's trying to be the predicate nominative. So I want to try to get this whole guy in this space. I can't do that. I can't put all those words in this one particular space. So therefore, anytime I have more than one word trying to fill one space, I get to put it up on a tree. So let's get rid of this arrow and let's build our tree. I'm going to change colors just so I can highlight this nominal clause. So here's my tree, little tree base. I get up here. And when I get up here, I got to figure out, why did I build this tree base? Well, now we have a number of reasons why. We could have a prep phrase, which we learned in Unit 1. And then now recently we learned that we could have a gerund phrase. We could have an infinitive phrase. And now instead of having a phrase, I have a clause. And a clause has a subject and a verb. So therefore, I've got to make it look like it's a subject and a verb, like a really basic sentence. Remember, we have a basic sentence like this is a subject and a verb. It doesn't really matter if the tree hits on this side or if the tree sits on the other side, as long as the tree holds this thing up. So now, as once I kind of say, okay, basically what you have is a really little mini sentence. Do the whole thing except for the word that. So when I get in here, I like starting with my verb. I think starting with the verb is so easy. So I'm going to start off the word find. It's my verb. Here's the word I as my subject. And then I find direct object abs. Ooh, here's that word to be, which I know typically creates a really nice pattern 9 or 10. Here's to be. I find the abs to be, and then here is my adjective, impressive. And then I can add in, it's your abs. It's 12-pack abs. So I'm going to do a pack, and then I'm going to have 12 describing it. Because you can have a 12-pack. I guess you can have a 6-pack. You can have a 24-pack. I'm not sure if you can have 24-pack abs, but maybe you do. Anyway, so what we have is we have this entire clause. We call him a nominal clause. And he's trying to be, this time, the predicate nominative. Now, in order to get this in the English language, in order to go from a subject verb to another subject verb, there has to be some kind of glue. And in order for a clause to actually, a dependent clause to start, there had to be something to actually begin it. And therefore, right now we're looking at the use of the word that. That's our expletive. So you notice over here, here's one expletive that we already have, to be. And we always float our expletives, because the expletive is not really part of the sentence. It's just kind of extra. Imagine you don't need the word to be. You can simply say, your ridiculous assumption is that I find your 12-pack abs impressive. I don't have to say the word to be. And if you think about it, you don't have to say the word that. You can say, your ridiculous assumption is I find your 12-pack abs impressive. So you really don't need the word to be. You don't need the word that. So just like we float the word to be, we're going to float the word that. Now, if you look in our textbook, the author doesn't really specify where to put the word that, but the word that is going to float always above the verb. So I'm going to put it here. And this is also an expletive. And this is our first example of a noun clause or a nominal clause. Once again, it's always going to go up on a tree, and it's going to have a subject, it's going to have a verb, and then it just builds from there like a regular sentence. Right now, we're looking at noun or nominal clauses that start with the word that. And once again, it can be anywhere a noun wants to be. This time it happens to be the predicate nominative. I'm going to pause and then restart my video with the second example of the use of the word that.